You never forget the moments that jolt you awake from the sleepwalking routines of your life. For Becky, that moment arrived just after midnight, somewhere along a lonely stretch of I-90, beneath the relentless drumming of rain against her windshield. The world outside her truck was a blur, headlights streaked with water, the distant glow of Spokane city lights smudged on the horizon, the kind of darkness that pressed in from all sides. She gripped the wheel tighter, feeling the ache in her shoulders. Her mind drifted, as it often did these days, to the divorce papers sitting unsigned on her kitchen table, the emptiness of her tiny rental, the echo of her own footsteps in a house that used to feel like a home. The rain was just another excuse to stay in her head, wrapped in numbness, until a pair of golden eyes shattered the monotony. Brakes screeched, the steering wheel jerked in her hands. Her truck fishtailed on the wet asphalt, heart rocketing in her chest as she slammed both feet down, one on the brake, one bracing for the impossible. Time stretched. For an instant, all she saw was the shape in her headlights, a large German shepherd, soaked and unmoving, standing square in the lane as if he owned the road. Other cars appeared, swerving, horns blaring, red taillights zigzagging in the downpour. The shepherd didn't flinch. He held Becky's gaze unblinking, an island of calm in the chaos. "Move," Becky whispered, fists clenched so hard her knuckles turned white. But the dog just stood there, fur plastered to his ribs, water running off him in muddy rivulets. His eyes, steady, unwavering, made her feel like she was the one out of place. The world shrank to the storm, the trembling beat of her heart, and the silent standoff. She was the last car to stop. Headlights from behind illuminated the scene. The shepherd, Becky's truck, the scattered crowd of drivers stepping out, umbrellas blooming against the night. "Is he hurt?" a man called out, his voice edged with impatience. "Why isn't he moving?" A woman in a soaked hoodie hesitated, then tried to approach. The shepherd barked, deep warning, more plea than threat, and jogged a few paces toward the shoulder, pausing just at the tree line. He looked back, tail raised, beckoning. Becky felt something stir in her chest. Instinct said, "Turn around, let animal control handle it." But something in the dog's eyes wouldn't let her go. Maybe it was the sense of purpose, or maybe it was just her own loneliness, mirrored back at her. Either way, she found herself grabbing her old flashlight from the glove compartment and stepping into the deluge. The woods loomed, black and dripping, the kind of forest where shadows tangled with the undergrowth, and every snapped twig sent shivers up your spine. Becky's boots sank into mud, branches whipping her face as she followed the shepherd's silent lead. Behind her, voices murmured, debating, but nobody else followed. She nearly turned back, once, twice, but the dog would always pause, glancing over his shoulder, eyes reflecting her flashlight beam like gold coins. She pressed on, each step deeper into a world that felt dreamlike and unreal. Suddenly, the shepherd stopped beside a mossy log, barking sharply. Becky stumbled closer, breath steaming, heart in her throat. She saw a small bundle of fur wedged beneath the log, motionless except for the faintest flutter of breath. A puppy, barely alive. Its sides heaved with the effort of breathing, eyes shut tight against the cold. "Hey there. Easy," Becky whispered, crouching low. Her hands shook, not from the cold, but from something older, deeper, a feeling she'd buried long ago. The crowd from the highway had gathered at the forest's edge, flashlights flickering. The shepherd pressed close to Becky's side, eyes urging her on. Someone called out, "It's just a stray. Let's go. Call animal control." But Becky was already there, coaxing the puppy with gentle fingers. her voice softer than she knew it could be. The shepherd hovered protectively, a living shield against the rain and the fear. The moment stretched, an unspoken understanding passing between woman and dog, between all the lost things in the world. Becky's sadness, the dog's desperation, the fragile hope wrapped in damp fur and shivering whimpers. She slid her arms under the puppy, cradling it to her chest. The shepherd licked her hand once, a simple thank you that needed no words. The crowd faded, their skepticism replaced with a hush of awe. As Becky turned back toward the highway, the shepherd at her side, she realized something had changed. She was no longer moving through life as a ghost. Tonight, something had found her in the darkness. A chance, a calling, a thread of connection stronger than fear. And somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled, signaling that this was only the beginning. Rain battered the windshield as Becky tore down the empty highway toward the nearest animal hospital, knuckles white on the steering wheel. The German shepherd, who she'd silently started to call the highway dog, leapt uninvited into the passenger seat the moment she opened the door for the shivering puppy. Water and mud pooled in the footwell, but Becky didn't care. The puppy needed help, and the dog, Scout, she decided, wasn't letting either of them out of his sight. The ER vet, a 20-something woman named Jenna with kind eyes and ink-black hair pulled back in a ponytail, waved Becky into the brightly lit lobby. The place smelled of antiseptic and wet fur. The puppy, limp as a rag, barely whimpered as Jenna's gloved hands swept him away behind swinging doors. Scout paced in circles, nails clicking anxiously on linoleum, pausing only to watch Becky with that steady, almost human gaze. In the harsh light, Becky noticed old scars on his muzzle, fur worn thin at his collarbone. Whatever life had thrown at him, this dog had survived it. A storm-soaked hour later, Jenna returned, scrubs splattered, cradling the puppy like a fragile treasure. "He's stable, touch and go, but you got him here just in time." She handed Becky a towel. "You, on the other hand, look like you fought off a bear." Becky managed a laugh, weak but real. "Feels like I did, or maybe just the universe." Scout pressed his nose into Jenna's hand, sniffed the puppy, and whined softly. The sight tugged at something deep inside Becky, a protectiveness she hadn't felt in years. "Does he belong to you?" Jenna asked, glancing at Scout. Becky shook her head. "He found me on the highway, blocked my truck, wouldn't move until I followed him. Led me straight to the puppy." She paused, realizing how crazy it sounded out loud. "I think he wanted help." Jenna crouched, studying Scout. No collar, no chip, no tags. And he's a shepherd, not a stray mutt. Somebody loved him once. A wave of empathy passed between the women. One lost, one rescued, both wondering what came next. Scout nudged the puppy, who licked his nose weakly. The dog's tail thumped the floor, slow and careful, as if afraid to celebrate too soon. Jenna smiled. "He's got good instincts. That puppy might not have lasted till morning." Word of the rescue spread fast. By sunrise, a reporter from the local paper showed up at the vet's office, camera in tow. "Highway Angel Dog saves a life," the headline would read by noon, complete with a grainy photo of Becky, the puppy, and Scout standing guard like a sentry. For a moment, the trio were minor celebrities, strangers dropping off treats, offers of help, and more than a few tearful hugs. Becky wasn't used to attention. She found herself shrinking away, lingering in the waiting room long after most people left. Scout, on the other hand, seemed to thrive in the spotlight, watchful but calm, keeping an eye on anyone who tried to get close to Becky or the puppy. His devotion was unwavering, as if he'd appointed himself their protector. One afternoon, after another round of puppy bottle feedings and paperwork, Jenna found Becky in the break room, arms folded, staring out the rain-flecked window. "You heading home?" Jenna asked, gentle. "Guess I have to." Becky bit her lip. "Can't take the puppy, not with my hours. But I'll foster Scout, if he'll have me." Jenna grinned. "He'll have you. He's been curled up by your truck all day." Becky smiled, nerves dancing in her stomach. She wasn't sure she was ready to care for anyone again, man, woman, or beast. Her life lately had been about building walls, not letting anyone in. But Scout's presence, his calm watchfulness, made the world feel a little less sharp around the edges. "Are you sure you don't want to keep the puppy?" Becky asked, glancing at the little bundle sleeping on a heating pad. "I'd love to," Jenna admitted. "My lease is pet-friendly, and I could use the company. Besides, he already answers to Finn." Scout looked up at the sound of the name, tail giving a soft wag. For a second, Becky imagined an invisible thread stretching between all of them, a broken family pieced together in the rain. A few days later, with a fresh bag of dog food, a borrowed leash, and a battered tennis ball, Becky led Scout to her truck. He hopped in without hesitation, turning once before settling on the passenger seat. There was no question. He belonged. At home, Becky set out an old quilt by the fireplace, and Scout lay down, head on his paws, eyes never leaving her. She unpacked groceries, her every move tracked by his quiet gaze. When she paused, overwhelmed by the sudden surge of responsibility and fear, what if she let him down too? Scout would pad over, pressing his nose into her palm, grounding her with a weight and warmth she hadn't realized she was missing. Night fell. The house, usually so silent it rang with loneliness, felt different. The shadows were softer, the air less hollow. As Becky drifted towards sleep, Scout climbed onto the end of her bed, uninvited but somehow welcome. When nightmares jolted her awake, he was there, a reassuring presence in the dark. She whispered into the silence, words she hadn't dared to say out loud for years. "Thank you for choosing me." Scout huffed, curling tighter, his loyalty a silent promise. For the first time in months, Becky felt hope flicker, small, stubborn, and impossibly bright. And as the storm passed outside, a pact was formed. Two survivors, found by fate on a rain-swept highway, ready to face the unknown together. Days after the highway rescue, Becky's life took on a quiet rhythm, soothing yet strange in its newness. Gone were the evenings spent listless on the couch, numbing herself with TV or scrolling through old texts from a life she no longer lived. Now there was Scout's heavy head nudging her elbow at breakfast, the gentle thump of his tail greeting her each morning, and the delighted squeals of Finn, the puppy, whenever Becky stopped by the vet's office. A fragile new family, unexpected but needed. Becky made a habit of stopping in at Jenna's clinic on her way home from work, each visit a small lifeline. Finn's recovery was nothing short of miraculous. Once just skin and bones, he now bumbled around the clinic's back room, all big paws and uncoordinated leaps. Jenna, for her part, fell hopelessly in love with the little pup, her laughter echoing down the halls as Finn chased squeaky toys or chewed her shoelaces. Becky watched the bond grow between them with a soft ache, part longing, part joy. It felt good to witness new beginnings, even if they weren't hers. At home, Scout settled into her daily routines with astonishing intuition. Mornings started with coffee and the newspaper at the little kitchen table, Scout resting his chin on Becky's knee as she read headlines out loud. It became their ritual, a quiet space where neither expected anything except presence. Afterward, they'd set out for a walk along the forest edge behind Becky's house. Scout trotted beside her, nose to the wind, tail wagging slowly, always glancing back to check she was keeping up. She found herself talking to Scout more than she'd ever spoken to anyone, pouring out old wounds and private fears. He listened with that patient, soulful look that dogs have, as if every word mattered. Sometimes, when the grief over her brother's death grew too heavy, when she couldn't stop replaying the last time she saw him, or the things she wished she'd said, Scout would press close, wrapping her in quiet comfort. He never barked, never whined, just let her lean on him, absorbing the weight of things unspoken. The house, so long filled with silence, was changing. Becky could feel it in the way she lingered over her woodworking in the garage, the way she sang softly to herself as she sanded down the edges of an old cedar chair. Scout watched her work, head cocked, sometimes nosing at fallen scraps as if encouraging her to keep going. On bad days, days when the world pressed in, when the ache of loss seemed too sharp, Scout would drop his battered tennis ball in her lap, a gentle nudge to go outside, breathe the fresh air, and try again. One evening, as dusk stretched long shadows over the backyard, Becky and Scout set out on a longer hike. The air was crisp, carrying the earthy scent of pine needles and river mud. Becky let her thoughts drift as she moved, Scout ranging ahead, always circling back, nose to the ground. They paused at the creek, watching the water tumble over smooth rocks. Becky knelt to fill her water bottle, her eyes catching on something half buried in the mud at the water's edge. Scout was already there, pawing gently at the dirt. She dug it free, a rusted dog tag, pitted with age but still legible beneath the grime. Edward Grayson, 1945, she read aloud, her voice echoing softly in the trees. She ran her thumb over the inscription, feeling the cold metal, the years that had passed since someone last wore it. Scout sat beside her, gaze fixed on the tag as if it meant something only he understood. A chill ran through Becky, but not from the cold. It was as if she'd stumbled into someone else's memory, an echo of a story waiting to be told. Back at home, she cleaned the tag, setting it on the windowsill above the sink. Scout sat at her feet, watching with quiet intensity, as if guarding some important secret. Becky wondered what connection the tag had to the land, to Scout, to the strange feeling of belonging that was growing inside her. That night, dreams came thick and tangled, faces she'd never seen, voices calling across decades. She woke to Scout nosing her hand, his warm breath grounding her in the present. She let her fingers curl into his fur, whispering thanks for his silent, steadfast company. Each day, the routines deepened, weaving Becky and Scout closer. She noticed how Scout seemed to sense her moods, perking up when she was cheerful, pressing close when the world felt heavy. Sometimes he'd wake her from nightmares, pawing gently at her shoulder until she surfaced, gasping, grateful not to be alone. One rainy Saturday, Jenna invited Becky and Scout for lunch at the clinic. Finn, now thriving, tumbled all over Scout, who tolerated the puppy's exuberance with patient dignity. Over sandwiches and coffee, the 3 women and 2 dogs, each with their own bruised histories, laughed and shared stories. For the first time in a long while, Becky felt the ache in her chest ease, replaced by something new, the slow, hopeful bloom of trust. After lunch, Becky mentioned the dog tag. Jenna's eyes widened with curiosity. Edward Grayson? That's an old name around here. Maybe you found a piece of history. Becky smiled, feeling the thread of connection stretch a little tighter. Scout looked up at her, eyes shining with a silent promise. Whatever mysteries waited in the woods, whatever pain lingered in the past, Becky knew she wasn't alone anymore. In the growing dusk, Scout led Becky back home, both of them walking a little lighter, their footsteps in perfect sync. Two lost souls learning, slowly, how to be found. Becky couldn't get the name on the dog tag out of her head. Edward Grayson, 1945. She repeated it like a puzzle, letting the syllables roll over her tongue as she washed dishes, sanded wood, or watched rain slip down the kitchen window. Every time she turned the tag over in her palm, Scout would sit beside her, tail thumping softly, as if sharing in her curiosity. One chilly morning, fog curled low over the pines, clinging to the road as Becky drove toward town. Scout rode shotgun, nose pressed to the cracked window, eyes alert to every shifting shadow. On impulse, Becky turned off the main road and followed the winding lane that led past the old Grayson homestead, a place she'd only ever glimpsed from a distance, tucked at the end of a gravel drive, half hidden behind weedy apple trees. The house itself sagged with age, gray clapboard, shuttered windows, roof mottled with moss and memory. Scout's ears pricked up the moment the truck slowed. He leaped out before Becky could leash him, darting straight for the barn with a determination that made Becky's heart race. "Scout, wait!" she called, scrambling after him, boots slipping in the dew-soaked grass. She caught up at the barn door, where Scout sniffed frantically at the cracked wood. The barn was older than the house, its beams silvered and splitting. Becky hesitated. Trespassing was never her style, but something about Scout's urgency left no room for second thoughts. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the sweet, faint scent of old hay. Light filtered through warped boards, falling in golden stripes on a jumble of forgotten tools and broken crates. Scout nosed through the shadows, tail high. He stopped at a stack of yellowed newspapers and barked, sharp and insistent. "Is someone there?" The voice was quavering, wary. Becky spun around, heart thumping. An elderly woman in a faded cardigan stood in the doorway, garden shears dangling from her hand. She studied Becky, then Scout, her sharp blue eyes flickering with suspicion and something like recognition. "I'm sorry," Becky began, cheeks hot. "My dog, well, he sort of led me here. I found a tag in the creek. Edward Grayson, 1945. I think it might be connected to this place." The woman's face softened at the name. She stepped closer, lowering the shears. "You must mean Eddie. I haven't heard his name in years." Her voice was thin, but carried a surprising strength. "I'm Mrs. Wilcox. Used to help out Clara Grayson, back when she was alive." Becky's breath caught. "Clara?" Mrs. Wilcox nodded. "Edward's wife. Sweet woman, though the years were hard on her. She waited for Eddie to come home from the war, but..." Her gaze dropped. "He never did. One day he was just gone, leaving her with a heartache no one could fix." Scout paced near the barn wall, nose working. Mrs. Wilcox watched him with a knowing smile. "Clara had a German shepherd too, Rex. They said he was a hero dog, saved a neighbor's child from drowning once. After Rex died, Clara kept his collar in a box by her bed." "Scout found the tag," Becky said quietly. "It was like he knew where to look." Mrs. Wilcox reached out, fingers brushing the metal tag. "Maybe he did. Dogs remember things, even things we forget." She nodded at the barn. "There's a grave out back, Clara's. She asked to be buried near the place she loved most." A chill prickled up Becky's arms. She followed Mrs. Wilcox outside, Scout close at her side. Beyond the barn, beneath a crooked willow, lay a small, unmarked stone, half sunk in the grass. Scout circled it, whining softly, pawing at the dirt. Becky knelt, tracing the rough letters, CG, barely visible beneath the moss. "She never got over Eddie," Mrs. Wilcox murmured, but she believed in promises, said Rex was still keeping one for her. A gust of wind rattled the branches overhead, scattering leaves like gold coins. Becky felt the weight of history pressing in, the echo of lost love, the grief and hope tangled in every blade of grass. Inside the barn again, Becky let her eyes wander. Scout pawed at a loose plank, whining. On a hunch, Becky knelt and pried it free. Behind it, wrapped in oilskin, was a letter, yellowed with age, sealed with brittle wax. Her hands shook as she opened it. The handwriting was elegant, the ink faded but legible. To whoever finds this, if you listen, you will understand. I wait for Eddie, for Rex, for the promise they made. Some things are kept not with words, but with patience and love. When you find what was lost, let them know. Clara never forgot and never gave up hope. C.G. Becky's throat tightened. She pressed the letter to her heart, suddenly overwhelmed. Scout pressed against her side, his warm body an anchor. Mrs. Wilcox, standing by the door, smiled softly. Clara believed Rex would lead someone back here one day. Maybe that someone is you. Becky gazed at Scout, his eyes bright and unwavering. Maybe it was fate. Or maybe it was just the stubborn hope that even old promises could be kept. Either way, she felt something inside her shift, an ache becoming a calling. As she left the barn, letter clutched in her fist, Becky felt the weight of the past settle into her bones, but not as a burden. It was an invitation, a hand reaching across time. She looked at Scout, heart thundering, and realized she wanted to see this story through, not just for Clara and Edward, but for herself, for the promise she hadn't known she needed to keep. The sun dipped behind the trees, lighting the barn in gold. Becky stood in the fading light, Scout by her side, and understood. Some wounds could only be healed by searching, by listening, by holding tight to hope until it led you home. The old letter from Clara Grayson burned a hole in Becky's pocket, a constant reminder that the past was alive and waiting for someone to listen. The words replayed in her mind as she sat on her porch that evening, running her thumb over the brittle wax seal. Scout lay at her feet, chin on his paws, but every now and then he'd glance at her, as if asking what they were supposed to do next. The air buzzed with expectation. The next morning dawned bright and unseasonably warm, dew still sparkling in the grass as Becky set out to the Grayson homestead once more. This time she brought Jenna and Finn along, Jenna curious about the unfolding mystery, and Finn exuberant as ever, trailing Scout like a tiny shadow. Jenna had become more than a friend. She was a co-conspirator now, eyes wide with excitement and nerves. Back at the barn, the three of them pored over Clara's letter in the golden light. Becky smoothed the fragile paper on a crate, Jenna leaning over her shoulder. "If you listen, you will understand," Jenna read softly. She was trying to tell us something. Her voice shook, barely above a whisper. Scout circled the barn, nose to the ground, tail high. Suddenly, he stopped at the far wall and began to paw at the boards. Becky moved quickly, heart pounding. "He's found something." Together they pried loose a warped beam. Dust flew as a weathered piece of parchment fluttered to the ground. A faded map, its corners soft and edges curled with time. Jenna caught her breath. "That's old, really old. Look, there are markings." She traced her finger over the ink, following winding trails and notations. River, willow, and at one spot, a tiny X. Beside it, in careful script, "For those who keep their promises." Becky stared at the map, her mind whirring. Clara must have left this for Eddie, or maybe Rex. She wanted someone to finish what she started. Scout nosed the map, tail wagging. Finn barked in response, dancing around his feet. The sense of adventure was contagious. For the first time since the accident, Becky felt truly alive, like she was standing at the edge of something bigger than herself. They were interrupted by the crunch of tires on gravel. Becky looked up to see a pickup truck pulling onto the drive, dust clouding the morning sun. A man climbed out, tall and broad-shouldered, his face shadowed beneath a baseball cap. He didn't smile as he approached, hands stuffed deep in his pockets. Jenna stiffened. "Do you know him?" Becky shook her head, rising cautiously. "Can I help you?" The man's voice was gruff, wary. "Name's Pete Grayson. This is my family's place." He glanced at the barn, at Scout, then back to Becky. "I've seen your truck out here. Mind telling me what you're doing?" She swallowed, nerves jumping. "We found something. Letters, a dog tag, a map. I thought maybe you'd want to know." Pete's eyes narrowed. "You digging for treasure or just digging up old ghosts?" His words landed heavy, years of hurt simmering underneath. Becky shook her head, her voice steady but gentle. "I don't want anything that isn't mine. Clara's story, it matters. And if there's something she left behind, maybe it's for all of us, not just me." There was a long silence. Scout stood between them, tail stiff, gaze fixed on Pete. Finn, sensing the tension, whimpered and hid behind Jenna's legs. Pete's jaw worked, torn between anger and something softer. Finally, he let out a sigh. "You said you found a map?" Becky nodded, holding it out. Pete took it, his hands rough and careful, eyes scanning the faded lines. He pointed at the X. "My grandmother used to tell stories about the woods, about a promise made and never kept. My dad thought she was crazy. Maybe she wasn't." Jenna stepped forward, voice warm. "We're just trying to honor her memory. You can help, if you want." Pete looked at Becky, then at Scout, who seemed to relax just a bit, as if sensing the shift. "Fine," Pete said gruffly, "but I'm coming with you. Nobody goes digging up Grayson's secrets without me." It was settled. The group, Becky, Scout, Pete, Jenna, and Finn, gathered supplies, flashlights, snacks, and copies of the map. The forest beyond the barn loomed, dense and green, sunlight dappling the ferns and fallen branches. With every step, Becky felt the weight of the world drop from her shoulders. She wasn't alone anymore. As they set out, the woods pressed in around them. Scout led, nose to the ground, guiding them along the trails marked on Clara's map. Becky fell into step beside Pete, unsure what to say. After a while, Pete broke the silence. "You really believe all this? The letters, the promises?" Becky hesitated, then nodded. "I think some stories are too important to let go. And I think your grandmother wanted you to know she never stopped loving your grandfather." Pete's face softened, just for a moment. Maybe. Or maybe she just wanted peace. Their conversation was interrupted by Scout barking, sharp and urgent. He stood at the foot of a willow tree, tail high, paws muddy. Becky hurried over, heart pounding. Beneath the tree, hidden in the roots, was an old tin box. Becky knelt, hands shaking as she brushed away dirt and leaves. The box was locked, rusted but intact. Pete knelt beside her, fingers brushing hers as he helped pry the box open. Inside, nestled on faded fabric, were medals, old photographs, and a bundle of letters. At the very bottom, Becky found a child's drawing, a German shepherd beside a man and a woman, all holding hands. Tears stung Becky's eyes. Pete let out a shaky breath. "That's my grandmother, my dad, and Rex." Jenna crouched beside them, Finn whining softly at her feet. "Looks like we're not the only ones who kept a promise," she whispered. As the afternoon sun filtered through the trees, Becky looked at Scout and felt the power of connection across years, loss, and hope. The adventure was only beginning, and whatever secrets the woods held, they would face them together. The next morning, the air was charged with the sort of nervous anticipation that reminded Becky of the first day of school or the moment before a storm broke. She packed her backpack carefully: water, trail mix, a battered notepad, and Clara's faded map, now protected in a Ziploc bag. Pete arrived just as she was loading Scout into the truck, his own gear slung over one shoulder. Jenna and Finn pulled up soon after, Finn barking excitedly at Scout, who gave the younger dog an approving nudge. They gathered at the edge of the forest. The sun flickered through the pines, casting shifting shadows along the narrow trail. Pete held the map, squinting at Clara's spidery handwriting. She marked 3 locations. This first one's not far, just past the old clearing. He glanced at Becky, a tentative truce in his voice. "You ready?" Becky gave a determined nod. "Let's see what Clara wanted us to find." Scout led the way, nose to the ground, tail wagging, moving with such purpose that it was impossible not to believe he was following more than just scent. Maybe a memory. Maybe something older. The woods were thick with bird calls and the sweet tang of sap. Finn tried to keep up, tripping over roots, with Jenna chuckling softly behind him. The first sight was a sunken hollow, overgrown with brambles and ferns. Scout stopped and pawed at the dirt, whining urgently. Pete and Becky dug together, hands stained with earth, until Becky's fingers struck metal. She brushed away the dirt to reveal a battered tin box, its lid decorated with stickers of American flags and faded cartoon dogs. Inside, they found a treasure trove of memories: black and white photos of a young Edward and Clara, medals from Edward's military days, a child's crayon drawing of a German shepherd, and a small leather-bound diary. Jenna leafed through the diary, her voice hushed. "It's written in a child's hand. Clara must have started this for her son. Listen. Today, Rex chased the crows out of the garden. Mama cried when she read Daddy's letter. Rex slept beside her all night." Pete swallowed hard. She never stopped searching. Not for Dad. Not for Grandpa. His words carried a new weight. Grief softened by the clarity of truth. Scout's ears pricked up, and he sniffed along the edge of the hollow, pausing at a barely visible trail leading deeper into the woods. Becky noticed faint footprints and a plastic water bottle, recent, not relics of the past. She exchanged a look with Jenna. "Someone else has been here." Pete frowned, scanning the trees. "I thought this place was forgotten." A sense of unease shivered through the group. Finn whimpered and pressed close to Jenna. Scout barked, sharp and warning, before trotting ahead, hackles slightly raised. They pressed onward, following Scout along the twisting path. The forest grew darker, denser, the hush broken only by their footsteps and the occasional crack of a branch overhead. The second site marked on the map was a rocky outcrop overlooking the river. Here the wind carried the rush of water and the distant hum of traffic. Civilization tantalizingly close, yet entirely separate from the world of secrets they were unraveling. Becky knelt at the base of a crooked willow tree, the bark carved with initials, EG plus CG, surrounded by a rough heart. Scout circled the tree, nose twitching, then barked twice and began digging furiously at the base of the trunk. Beneath a tangle of roots, they uncovered a rusted tin, heavier than the first. Pete forced the lid open, revealing more photographs, a military dog tag, and a small velvet pouch. Inside the pouch was a simple silver ring, worn smooth, the inscription inside faded almost to nothing. Jenna gasped softly. "A wedding ring." Pete turned it over in his hand. Voice choked. "My grandmother wore her own. but she always said she was waiting for Eddie to bring her his. The diary's last pages were written in code, strings of numbers and letters that made little sense at first glance. Becky's mind raced. She remembered her brother teaching her simple ciphers as a child. Maybe Clara had left one final riddle. The group sat on the riverbank, piecing together the diary's code. It was Scout, ever patient, who seemed to guide Becky's hand to the right clue. An old photograph of Edward holding up 3 fingers, the background a willow tree with a distinctive twist in the trunk. Jenna's eyes widened. It's not just a code, it's directions. Look, the oldest willow by the riverbank. 3 twists in the trunk. That's our next site. As the sun dipped lower, Scout took the lead once more. Becky fell in beside Pete, her nerves humming with the thrill of the chase and the weight of new questions. Pete watched the woods, his suspicion shifting slowly to trust. But a crack in the brush made everyone freeze. Becky caught a glimpse of movement, a flash of red, the glint of something metallic. Someone else was out there, watching them. Scout positioned himself between Becky and the trees, growling softly. Pete clenched his fists. If someone's following us, we need to be careful. Jenna squeezed Becky's hand, fear flickering in her eyes. Maybe it's just a hiker. But Becky knew better. The Grayson legacy had always drawn curiosity, and sometimes greed. She felt the diary, the ring, and the old map like weights in her backpack, more valuable now than ever. Scout kept a steady pace, never letting the threat behind them slow him down. At last, the trees parted to reveal a clearing by the river, a massive willow with 3 distinct twists in its trunk. The sun bathed the spot in golden light, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. Scout barked once, triumphantly, and began to dig. As they gathered around, hearts pounding, Becky understood. The secrets of the past were about to surface. But so were the dangers. This was no longer just about family history. It was about who had the courage to see it through. And standing there with Scout, Pete, Jenna, and Finn, Becky realized she was ready to fight for every piece of the truth. The willow tree stood like a sentinel on the riverbank, its twisted trunk draped with trailing green curtains that shimmered in the breeze. The setting sun painted gold across the water, catching dust motes and making the whole world look washed clean, almost sacred. Becky's breath came quick and shallow as she knelt beside Scout, feeling the weight of every step, every secret that had led them to this place. Pete crouched at her side, his face drawn with worry and hope in equal measure. Jenna stood a little behind, one hand on Finn's collar, her eyes scanning the shadowed edge of the woods. Finn whined softly, picking up on the nervous energy that buzzed through the clearing like static. In the hush that settled over them, even the river seemed to hold its breath. Scout, nose low, sniffed intently around the twisted roots. He circled the tree twice, tail rigid, then started to dig with methodical purpose. The ground was damp and loose. Becky's heart thudded louder with every clump of dirt Scout flung behind him. She knelt to help, fingers numb with anticipation. The box appeared suddenly, half buried and crusted in mud. Pete's hands shook as he helped clear away the earth. The tin was old, rusted at the corners, but its weight promised something important inside. Scout sat down and looked at Becky, eyes expectant, almost urging her to finish what Clara started. Becky glanced up, movement at the edge of the clearing. The man in the red jacket, the one she'd glimpsed earlier, now stood watching, arms folded, a hard glint in his eyes. Pete's jaw clenched. "That's him," he muttered. "He's been following us since the barn." Jenna's grip tightened on Finn's leash, her voice barely above a whisper. "Should we call the police?" Becky shook her head. Let's see what's inside first. Her hands worked the box open, breaking the seal with a sharp snap. Inside, wrapped in a yellowed handkerchief, were treasures lost to time. A stack of letters bound by ribbon, a tarnished wedding ring, and at the bottom, a final envelope marked simply, "For Clara." Pete lifted the ring, his thumb tracing the faded inscription. "It's his," he whispered. "My grandfather's." Scout sat between Becky and the stranger, his posture alert and protective. The man took a step forward, voice cold. "That's private property. You're trespassing." Becky rose to her feet, facing him with all the steadiness she could muster. "We're not here for treasure. This is about family, about closure." The man sneered. "Closure? Or a headline? People pay for stories like this, you know." His hand drifted toward his belt. A flash of metal, maybe a pocket knife, maybe just a threat. Pete squared his shoulders, standing between the man and Becky. "Back off. You have no right to any of this." His voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. For a moment, time slowed. A tense standoff, the river hissing in the background. Scout's low growl vibrating in the silence. Becky's heart hammered. Finn barked once, sharp and high. Jenna, trembling, took out her phone. "I'm calling the sheriff," she said, voice steadier than she felt. The man's eyes narrowed. "You think I care? I'll be gone before they get here." He lunged, hand reaching for the box, but Scout was quicker. He moved like a shadow, planting himself between Becky and the stranger, teeth bared in a silent warning. Pete didn't back down. He stood firm, fists clenched, blocking the man's path. "You're not getting this," he said flatly. "This is our family's story, not yours." The man hesitated, weighed his odds, and then, seeing Becky and Pete's resolve, Scout's unwavering stance, and Jenna's phone held high, he turned, cursing under his breath, and melted back into the woods. Tension snapped like a twig. Becky released a breath she didn't realize she was holding. The sheriff's deputy arrived a few minutes later, blue lights flashing against the twilight. After a round of questions, the group was left alone by the river. Becky opened the stack of letters with trembling hands. Edward's words spilled across the pages. Raw, honest, haunted by the ghosts of war and regret. "My dearest Clara," one letter began, "I wanted to come home to you, but I couldn't bring my darkness into your world." He described the nightmares, the shame, the desperate hope she'd forgive him for disappearing to protect her from himself. In the final envelope, a single line brought tears to Becky's eyes. "You were always my light. I only wish I'd been strong enough to return." Pete wept quietly, head bowed, the wedding ring warm in his palm. Jenna knelt beside him, arms around his shoulders, Finn nuzzling their hands. Scout pressed close to Becky, his silent strength grounding her. For the first time, the mystery was not a weight, but a key. Becky read aloud Edward's last words. Clara's patience, her hope, her faith in love, these were not wasted. Through pain and loss, she'd built a bridge back to the present. Becky wiped her eyes. "We can finally tell their story." Pete nodded, the first true smile breaking through his tears. "And we can finally let them rest." As the last light faded from the sky, Scout curled up beside Becky, the found box at their feet. The letters spread like petals in the grass. The river's song was soft and steady, and Becky felt, for the first time in years, that she too was home. The story of Edward and Clara Grayson swept through Spokane like wildfire. Within days, the local paper ran a front-page feature, complete with photos of the hidden treasures, faded dog tags, the returned wedding ring, and Scout. his noble face capturing the hearts of everyone who read about the angel dog who led a grieving family home. News vans showed up outside Becky's house and at the Grayson homestead. But Becky, Pete, Jenna, and their dogs avoided the spotlight as much as possible, their focus on honoring the Grayson legacy and making sense of their own journeys. Still, word spread. Letters arrived from veterans and their families, stories of sons, brothers, husbands who never made it home, and of women who waited a lifetime for a knock at the door. The Historical Society called, asking to archive the letters and mementos, and it was decided that Edward and Clara's story deserved more than a place in a dusty file. It deserved a memorial, a true celebration of waiting, love, and the courage to let go. Pete and Becky worked together, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes in comfortable silence, to gather the artifacts and prepare them for public display. Scout became a fixture at Pete's side, following him through the old Grayson house as they sorted family photographs and unearthed keepsakes Clara had hidden away decades before. Pete talked openly about his family's pain for the first time, sometimes choking up as he held a faded letter or a worn collar. Becky watched him transform, not from grief to joy, but from isolation to connection. The town rallied. Local carpenters volunteered their skills, landscapers donated plants and stone, and the Historical Society raised funds for a memorial garden on the Grayson land. Jenna handled the logistics with calm precision, keeping Becky and Pete grounded whenever emotions ran high. Finn, now robust and joyful, became the unofficial mascot, chasing butterflies through the half-built flower beds. The day of the dedication dawned crisp and clear. 100 folding chairs dotted the grass beside the old barn. There were families, veterans, old-timers who remembered the Graysons, and children tugging at their parents' hands, eager to meet Scout. The media kept a respectful distance. At the garden's heart, beneath the willow tree where it all began, stood a simple stone engraved with 2 names, Edward and Clara Grayson. Beside it, a bronze plaque read, "For those who wait and those who lead them home." Becky stood at the front, Scout at her side, feeling her knees shake. She wore a simple dress and her brother's old jacket, comforted by the familiar weight of the dog tag she'd found at the creek. Pete and Jenna flanked her, Finn sitting patiently at Jenna's feet. When she stepped forward, the crowd fell silent. The wind rustled the willow leaves overhead, and Becky felt a strength she hadn't known in years. She spoke honestly, voice trembling at first, but gaining power as she told their story. The lonely highway, the night of the storm, Scout's desperate plea, and the long journey through grief and memory. She spoke of Clara's hope and Edward's suffering, of the dog who seemed to know exactly what was needed at every turn. She shared her own losses, her brother, her marriage, her sense of purpose, and how, through the kindness of strangers and the loyalty of a dog, she'd found herself slowly stitched back together. "We're all carrying something," she said, searching the faces in the crowd. "A wound, a memory, a hope that refuses to let go. Sometimes it takes courage to face the past, and sometimes it takes the help of someone who refuses to give up, someone who loves us, even when we can't love ourselves." Pete took the stage next, voice thick with emotion as he thanked the community for helping to lift the weight from his family's shoulders. "I grew up ashamed of what I didn't know," he admitted. "But this story belongs to all of us. Clara waited her whole life for closure. Now, thanks to a stubborn dog and a group of people who refused to walk away, we can give it to her and to each other." Jenna read out some of the letters sent by townspeople and veterans, their words echoing the universal ache of waiting, hoping, and sometimes forgiving. The crowd wept openly, hugging loved ones, holding hands. Scout, sensing the moment's weight, went from row to row, pressing his head gently against knees and palms, offering comfort in the way only a loyal dog can. As the ceremony ended, the community gathered at the garden's edge, planting wildflowers in honor of Edward and Clara. Children knelt in the dirt, hands muddy, laughter ringing in the afternoon air. Becky watched, her heart full, as Scout rolled in the grass, finally allowing himself to play. Finn barked and danced, chasing butterflies and falling petals. A few older veterans lingered, sharing stories of the war and the long journey home. Pete's daughter, who had flown in for the dedication, wept quietly as she laid a bouquet beside the stone. Jenna took a photo of Becky, Scout, and Pete beneath the willow, their faces shining with relief and pride. As the sun dipped low, painting the garden in warm amber light, Becky felt the past and present blend together. The garden was no longer just a memorial. It was a place of laughter, healing, and hope, where wounds could be named and maybe finally begin to heal. Scout lay beside Becky, his head in her lap, eyes closed as if he too was dreaming of a world made whole. In that moment, Becky knew they had all been rescued. Not just the puppy in the rain, not just the soldier lost to memory, but every person who dared to remember, to wait, and to love. Autumn came early that year, painting Spokane's hills in amber and crimson. The Grayson Memorial Garden glowed beneath the shifting sun, its wildflowers nodding in the crisp breeze. On the day the town gathered to dedicate the site, Becky stood at the front, hands trembling around the note cards she'd prepared and nearly forgotten. Scout rested quietly at her feet, his head held high, golden eyes sweeping the crowd as if he too understood the weight of this day. Children chased each other along the garden's edge. Veterans in pressed uniforms sat straight-backed in the front row, hats in their laps, eyes shining with tears old and new. Pete's daughter hovered near the willow tree, snapping photos of the plaque. Jenna, calm as ever, kept the ceremony moving, her words a steady bridge between past and present. When Becky stepped to the microphone, the hush was so complete she could hear her own breath. She hesitated, then, with Scout's reassuring presence at her side, began to speak, voice trembling but clear. "I want to thank all of you for being here," Becky said, glancing at the crowd, feeling the enormity of what they'd built together. "I came to Spokane a stranger, running from my own grief, convinced that nobody could understand what I'd lost. But this story, Edward and Clara's story, found me on a rainy night, and it taught me something I thought I'd forgotten, that we're never truly alone, not as long as we're willing to listen and to remember." She told them about the night on the highway, about Scout's unwavering will, about following a dog into the darkness and stumbling onto a mystery that spanned decades. She described the days spent sifting through old letters and secrets, and the moments when she almost gave up, afraid, like so many others, that some stories were just too painful to face. But every clue, the dog tag, the hidden letter, the coded diary, wasn't just about the past, Becky continued, voice steady now. It was a bridge, a way to reach across time and say, "I see you. You mattered. Your waiting, your heartbreak, your courage. It changed the world for those who came after." She glanced at Pete, whose eyes shone with unshed tears. "Thank you to the Grayson family for your courage in facing these truths. Thank you, Pete, for trusting me with your family's story, and for teaching me that vulnerability isn't a weakness. It's the first step toward healing." Scout shifted, laying his head gently on Becky's foot. She smiled and turned her words to him. "Scout was never just a companion. He was our witness. He guided me when I was lost, just like he led us to the truth about Edward and Clara. Sometimes the ones who help us most, the ones who connect the dots, are the ones who walk beside us quietly, on 4 legs instead of 2. A soft murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Becky caught the eyes of the children gathered at the edge of the garden, their faces shining with curiosity and hope. She let her voice go deeper. I've learned that the past doesn't disappear just because we're afraid to look at it. In fact, it grows heavier the longer we keep it hidden. But when we're brave enough to open the old boxes and share the old wounds, we find out that pain shared is pain halved. That legacy isn't a statue or a plaque. It's the stories we choose to remember, the empathy we show, and the courage to face the unknown together. She took a breath, wind swirling wildflower petals at her feet. Sometimes we think we're rescuing a dog or righting an old wrong. But the truth is, sometimes it's us who get rescued in return. We're all here because of kindness, because of someone refusing to let the past go unanswered. That's the ripple effect of love. It never stops. Pete joined Becky at the microphone, hand warm on her shoulder. My grandmother waited her whole life for closure. My family tried to bury the pain, thinking that would make it easier. But Becky and Scout showed us another way. By facing it, together, we created new strength. This garden is for Clara and Edward, but it's for all of us too. Tears traced lines down Pete's face as he placed the Grayson wedding ring and dog tag into the memorial box beneath the willow, a final gesture of closure and peace. Children from the town, some shy, some bold, took turns planting wildflower seeds around the plaque. Veterans saluted, a slow, dignified honor for Edward and all who never made it home. The air was full of stories, laughter, and the subtle relief of burdens shared. As the crowd drifted away, Becky lingered, kneeling to press her hand to Scout's back, her other hand on the fresh-turned earth. Jenna joined her, kneeling beside Pete, all 4 of them bound by memory, loss, and the unexpected miracle of community. In the quiet that followed, Becky felt her heart settle. She understood now what it meant to carry a legacy, not just in relics, but in the living, breathing chain of people who choose every day to show up for one another. The healing she found was not just for her, or even for the Graysons. It was for everyone who believed that old wounds could heal, that broken stories could be made whole. Scout gazed up at Becky, eyes reflecting the autumn light, and she whispered, "Thank you, old friend, for bringing me home." The sun slipped behind the willow, casting long, hopeful shadows across the garden. For the first time in years, Becky let herself believe in new beginnings, her pain not erased but transformed, woven into the fabric of a community strong enough to carry any story and gentle enough to listen. Several months slipped by after the dedication of the Grayson Memorial Garden, and in that gentle passage of time, the rhythms of Becky's life and of the town shifted into something warmer, more hopeful. The air was filled now with birdsong and laughter. The garden flourished, wildflowers blossoming in bright, cheerful bursts, while the old willow stood proud, its roots embracing the stories left in its shade. Becky walked the garden often, Scout padding at her side, his muzzle silvering with age but his eyes still clear and bright. The pain that had haunted her for so long felt different now, no longer a cold ache, but a quiet companion, proof of all she'd lost and all she'd found. She'd come to understand what Clara's patience meant, what it was to keep a promise even when the world had moved on. On the annual day of remembrance, the garden was alive with energy. Locals streamed in, old and young, families and veterans, children chasing each other between the flower beds. Pete and his daughter arrived early, Pete's face open and calm, no longer clouded by the shadows of unanswered questions. Jenna, ever organized, had set up a story table beneath the willow, a place where anyone could sit and write down a memory, a prayer, or a hope for the future. Becky volunteered there, offering pens and encouragement, listening as people, some for the first time, spoke aloud the things they'd carried in silence. Scout had become something of a local legend. Children gathered around him, giggling as he let them tug gently at his ears or rest their heads against his flank. He moved among the crowd with gentle patience, offering silent comfort to those who needed it most. Becky noticed a little girl, maybe 7 years old, sitting quietly on a bench, arms wrapped around her knees. Her eyes were red and swollen. Scout, sensing her sorrow, approached with a slow wag of his tail, and after a moment, the girl reached out, fingers tangling in his fur. She began to talk, her words at first broken, then pouring out in a quiet rush. Becky watched from a distance, heart full, knowing the healing power that can come from simply being heard. That night, Becky wrote in her journal, the words pouring out like a confession. Healing doesn't erase the scars. It turns them into reminders that we survived, that we learned, that we kept moving forward. Every story told here weaves us together. Every loss, every victory, every promise kept. They're all threads in the same tapestry. She had learned, at last, that none of us walks alone. Some journeys are winding, full of loss and confusion, but it is the act of reaching out, of listening, of honoring each other's pain and joy, that turns a collection of strangers into a community. Weeks passed, and Becky found herself drawn to new purpose. With Jenna's encouragement and Pete's help, she began training Scout as a therapy dog. Together, they visited nursing homes and schools. At the senior center, residents stroked Scout's fur and told stories of their own lost pets, their voices growing stronger with each memory. In classrooms, anxious children opened up to Scout in ways they never did with adults, whispering secrets into his attentive ears. The memorial garden became a hub for remembrance and renewal. Pete and his daughter often spent afternoons there, tending the flowers and teaching children about Edward and Clara, about waiting and forgiveness. Becky watched, sometimes joining, sometimes content just to witness the gentle transformation in herself and those around her. The garden was no longer a place of sorrow. It was a place of laughter, friendship, and new beginnings. One late afternoon, as the sun slanted low and warm, Becky stood beneath the willow with Scout beside her, gazing out at the garden they'd helped create. She thought about Clara and Edward, about her brother, about the aching emptiness that had once filled her days. She thought about how that emptiness had been slowly, stubbornly replaced by kindness, by memory, by courage. She turned to the gathering of townspeople, her voice carrying softly but firmly. Don't shy away from the stories that haunt you. Let them guide you. Rescue what is lost. Be the guardian, the listener, the hand that helps someone find the way home. That's how we honor the past, and that's how we shape a future worth believing in. As dusk fell, the air filled with the low hum of voices, of stories told and retold, of promises renewed. The memorial garden glowed in the lamplight, Scout's silhouette tall and steady beside Becky, both of them framed against the warm glow of home. There would always be new losses, new wounds, new stories in need of a listener. But there would also be wildflowers, laughter, the loyalty of friends, and the unwavering hope that the lost can be found. Becky realized that her journey wasn't over. It had only changed shape. She was no longer running from the past, but weaving it into something new, something strong. Scout nudged her hand, as if to say, "We're not finished yet." Becky smiled, her heart light. She knelt beside Scout, her fingers buried in his fur, and looked up at the stars beginning to prick the sky. "Thank you, old friend," she whispered, "for every mile and every memory." As the last light faded, Becky, Scout, and the whole community stood together, keepers of stories, healers of wounds, and stewards of hope. In their laughter, their memories, and their courage, they offered an invitation to everyone who would come after. Don't let your pain silence you. Don't hide your story. Share it, so that others might find their way home too. And under the gentle arms of the willow tree, with the garden blooming and the air alive with promise, Becky understood at last. She was home, and she was never truly alone.